record. And then that way I can introduce Richard. And then once I've introduced Richard, he'll be able to share his screen and then start his talk. So you all might have already read what's on the screen, but I'll go through it anyway, because it's always nice to give Richard his due introduction. So Richard studied geography, specializing in desert morphology and biogeography at the University of Cambridge. He's now currently on the faculty of the American University in Cairo. I believe he is actually calling from Egypt as we speak now. A long-time resident of Egypt, he has traveled extensively throughout the Middle East. He's also an author of A Naturalist Guide to the Birds of Egypt and the Middle East. Um, Egypt, of course, is located in the northeast corner of Africa and is largely in the West Palearctic region, with over 466 bird species recorded there, some of which, if anyone's listening, we've already been talking about, including a number of African species whose range extends up from the Nile Valley and into the WP. Spectacular numbers of raptors, storks, which I like myself, and cranes pass through each spring and fall. The ancient Egyptians also portrayed many of these birds and other animals in incredible detail that you can see below. So fantastic stuff. Okay, Richard, I'm going to stop sharing. So hopefully you'll be able to share your screen.
Hope so. Does that work?
Yeah, brilliant. And if you just want to click on the slideshow as before.
Okay, slideshow.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, I shall disappear. Just click slideshow again, I think.
Yep, I think I do. Slideshow from beginning.
Might be resume slideshow there. Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
So I'm on now?
Yep, looks great. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed to the London Bird Club and to the London Natural History Society for inviting me to talk to you today. I'd like to introduce myself a little more. I teach at the American University in Cairo, and I've lived in Cairo for the last almost 40 years. But I've published extensively on the birds and animals of Egypt, and here you have some of the publications, my more recent publications. So, A Field Guide to the Birds of Egypt from John Beaufoy Publishing, also published as The Birds of Egypt and the Middle East, and A Field Guide to the Mammals of Egypt, which is a book I'm especially proud of because I had to paint the illustrations rather than just photograph. And then the upcoming book, The Animals of Ancient Egypt. I've traveled extensively in the Middle East and Africa and South Asia, and extensively in Egypt, because Egypt is a country of enormous challenges. But I am centered on Cairo. And this is the view from my terrace, which seems very barren. Cairo is a city now of 23, 24 million people. Nobody knows exactly how many. And I'm right at the very center of it. And this might seem a very barren area, but it's not. From the terrace that I have a pair of barn owls that have nested just across the way on a deserted balcony. I have a pair of kestrels that nest on another rooftop crevice. I have hooded crows. I have house sparrows which are threatened in the UK, but here are doing very well. I have palm doves, laughing doves, etc. I have mammals, not the red fox that you associate as the urban mammal in London, but weasel. The weasel is the urban predator that we have in here in Cairo. At night, I have Coul's pipistrelle bats flying past, and I have my bat detector, so I know which species I'm looking at. I've got geckos on my walls. So there is an enormous amount of wildlife here, right in the center of a city of, as I say, 23 to 24 million people. And from that same terrace in the morning, I get the cheeps and chirps of the house sparrow. I get the cries of my kestrels coming over. But I also get the chortlings of the common bulbul, one of the common birds in central Cairo. In Sinai, we get another species of bulbul called the white spectacled bulbul. This is the common bulbul here. Looks very dull, but its chortlings are enormously invigorating in the morning. I get this, the white-throated kingfisher. If you go back to the slide of that cityscape and you see the aerials and the satellite dishes, etc., I hear this bird calling most mornings with this sort of shrill trill, and it's perched on top of these aerials and satellite dishes. And stunning, when it flies, all of that turquoise and blue comes out. And I get the hoopoe. In Arabic, the hoopoe is called the hudhud. Its Latin name, as you can see, is the upopo epops. All of these words relate to its call. Hoo, 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 hoo. I have this on my terrace. When I grew up as a small child in North London, I had my observer's book of birds, and the hoopoe was in there, and it said it was very, very rare. And it looks so exotic. And it is exotic. It's the bird that delivered the wisdom to Solomon. I have it now on my balcony regularly and calling. And this is going to be one of the themes of my talk, is to how accurately the ancient Egyptians portrayed these birds and animals in friezes that go back to 5,000 years ago and beyond. So you have here the hoopoe, and credit to Tracy Robinson for this photograph. The crest that you see when it lands is erected as a Native American headdress, as it were. And this is how it was portrayed in ancient Egypt. All the features are there. And it is portrayed in a papyrus swamp, and we'll be talking more about that later. But all the features are there, that incredible crest, just as it lands, and it's portrayed here just as it's landing. So the ancient Egyptian civilization, I believe, is unique in that they portrayed the animals and birds and the natural history that they were living with such accuracy that 5,000 years later, we as modern tourists who come and see the temples and tombs in modern Egypt can identify these birds and animals to species level. It's astonishing. And so this is where I live. This is Egypt. And Egypt is a country in the northeastern corner of Africa, at the eastern end of the Mediterranean, and has a number of important habitats. It's largely desert, 96% desert, and to You have this narrow vein of green that runs through the eastern part of the country. This is the Nile Valley, which just north of Cairo fans out into the Nile Delta. And this is where most of Egypt's vegetation, um, agriculture, industry, population exists. So this narrow vein of life exploding into the delta just north of Cairo. But there are very different habitats. Egypt, 96% desert, but very, very different habitats. On the western side, we have the Western Desert. Very, very sparse, very, very barren. And when you go down to the south and western part of the Western Desert, it is perhaps the hottest and driest and most barren part of the planet. Extraordinary. On the north coast, if you go up from the Western Desert, there's a very narrow area of rainfall, and you get some special species there. The Sinai Peninsula, in the south of Sinai, huge mountains up to 8,000 feet tall, and some special birds there like Tristram's grackle, Sinai rosefinch, etc. On the eastern side of the Nile, you've got the Eastern Desert, very different from the Western Desert, because the Eastern Desert is mountainous and is carved through by a series of wadis. And right down in the south, in the southeast corner, this is a very special area. Egypt falls within the Western Palearctic. And we get many special species that creep into the Western Palearctic, particularly along the Nile Valley. But in that very, very southeasternmost part of the country is the Halib Triangle, or the Sudanese Administrative Zone. Now, this is important politically, but also biologically, because this Halib Triangle is not part of the Western Palearctic. It's part of the Africo-tropical region. Politically, it is very sensitive. And this was made very apparent a few years ago. A bird book was published, and it showed Egypt here, and this particular area was portrayed as part of Sudan. When that bird book was republished, it was republished in Egypt, and that small area, the publishers had to put a little sticker over it because it was portrayed wrongly as part of Sudan. It's actually part of Egypt, but not part of the Western Palearctic. And there are certain bird species like the fulvus babbler and the shining sunbird that are found there, but nowhere else in Egypt. But they are not Palearctic species. Mammal species such as the zorilla and the aardwolf found there, but nowhere else in Egypt. And the mountain Jebel Elba, which has Egypt's only forest, is there, but it is not part of the Western Palearctic, but politically it is part of Egypt. So one of the reasons that Egypt is a big attraction for ornithologists is because of the migration. found at the very eastern end of the Mediterranean, the large-winged birds, the large raptors, the storks, the cranes, the pelicans, etc., they cannot migrate over open water like the Mediterranean, but are forced along the coastlines where the thermals hit the shores and they can saw their ways south and north in the spring and fall migrations. And Egypt is fantastic for these migratory birds in spring and fall. This is one, the common buzzard, of which we have numerous subspecies passing through our airspace in spring and fall, but also common cranes and storks, white storks in huge numbers, but also black storks, but in much smaller numbers. White pelicans, and all the large raptors, the eagles, the vultures, etc. So during spring and fall, migration is enormously important. But this is what Egypt is most largely connected with, the desert. And as I said earlier, 96% of Egypt is desert. And this is the popular representation of the desert, just a huge, great sand sea. That is a misrepresentation because the desert is incredibly diverse in many ways. Here, this is the Western Desert in Bahrain. And here we are again, not dunes, but what's called Hamada and mountain desert covered with vast amounts of rock and stone called Hamada Desert. And here we have in the White Desert in Farafra, a remote oasis, a very different desert environment. But the desert is an extraordinarily diverse habitat in which many, many birds and animal species exist. But for the naturalist, it's very, very difficult to explore because most of the birds and animals there are nocturnal. So you can go and camp out in the desert and you wake up in the morning, very early generally. You step outside your tent and you'll have tracks and trails of all the different animals that have been there overnight. There'll be gerbils and jerboas. There'll be jerts. And then there'll be the animals that prey on those gerbils and jerboas and jerts. Desert foxes, the fennec fox, the Rappel sand fox, etc. And in this case, these are jackal tracks that I photographed for Afra Oasis at the White Desert that you saw in the previous slide. So it's very, very challenging watching and observing animals in the desert. And it's their secondary tracks and trails that give you the clues as to what is happening there. But there are special birds. And as with most of the photographs of birds in this presentation, these are taken from my book or books, The Naturalist Guide to the Birds of Egypt and The Naturalist Guide to the Birds of the Middle East and Egypt. And credit is given to all the photographers here. This is Temminck's lark, which is closely related to the horned lark that is found throughout the Western Palearctic and Northern Western Palearctic, and also North America. In the UK, we still call it the shore lark, and the similarities can be seen there. In Cairo, the common crow is the hooded crow, the grey and black crow that is familiar with many people in the UK and Northern Europe. In the desert, we have a different species. We have the brown-necked raven, which is superficially similar to the carrion crow, the now a separate species from the hooded crow, but the all-black crow. This is the desert species, and you can see this one feeding on a carcass of a camel. It doesn't look very brown in its brown neck, but when the wind ruffles up that neck, that brown becomes apparent. And then the Egyptian nightjar, almost invisible by day. And it roosts out in the desert by day, completely camouflaged on the desert floor, almost impossible to see. But then at night, it comes down to the valley and hawks for large insects, beetles, etc. I found that the best way to find the Egyptian nightjar was actually by horseback. And a good friend of mine who's sadly passed away, Mindy Bahal el-Din, and you might be familiar with her husband, Sharif Bahal el-Din. She wanted to find the Egyptian nightjar. So I was able to take her out into the desert on horseback. And by day, when you go across the desert by horse, the horse will just disturb the nightjar and it will fly up. And she managed to find the Egyptian nightjar. So a very special bird. So the desert birds are very, very difficult to see and find, but they're there. And the desert is an incredible living environment. But within the desert, we have a series of oases. This oasis is one of the most remote. It's Siwa Oasis on the border with Libya, right in the northwest corner of Egypt. And you can see if you look over the palm groves and the olive orchards in the background, you can see just how stunning the difference is between the green of the oasis and the yellow and ochre of the desert. And Siwa Oasis is incredibly remote even today. It's a 2-day trip to get there from Cairo, but it's one of the reasons it's famous is because way back, going back 2,500 years, Alexander the Great visited Siwa, and he visited Siwa to visit the temple of Amun, where there was an oracle. And the oracle of Siwa told Alexander what his destiny was. Nobody knows what the oracle told Alexander. Nobody knows where Alexander's tomb is today buried, but he visited Siwa, he visited the oracle, and you can visit the temple of Amun to this day. So you have these series of oases in the vastness of the Western Desert. But then that small part of Egypt, which is green and fertile, is the Nile Valley and the Delta. And the Nile Valley runs up through Egypt, this narrow green vein of life, and then splits just north of Cairo into the Damietta branch and the Rashid or Rosetta branch. And the delta is this huge triangle of life in northern Egypt. And all of the plants along the valley and in the delta are largely artificial. They're exotic. So many of Egypt's main crops, like maize, like potatoes, like tomatoes, those all came from the New World. They were not here in ancient Egypt. Sugarcane, cotton, mangoes, oranges, lemons, all the citrus fruits. They came from Southeast Asia, Africa, or Southwest Asia. There is only one part of Egypt where the original Nilotic vegetation still exists, and that's this small group of islands north of the High Dam, and everything south of the High Dam has been flooded under Lake Nasser. North of there, everything is now an artificial human created landscape of all of these imported crops. But in Aswan, there's this small group of islands that still have the original Nilotic vegetation and the animals and birds that are still found there. So that's a photograph of those special islands. So what about the birds? Well, this is one of the birds that's most associated with Egypt, and this is the Egyptian goose. It's not really a goose, it's more of closely related to the shelduck. And in Egypt, it breeds from Aswan south and is a winter visitor further north. If you want to see an Egyptian goose, you'd be probably better off going to London now, where they are now breeding, or indeed in Northern Europe. And this one was photographed in Portugal, but it appears in the hieroglyphs. But then we have some special birds, and these are birds that come up to Egypt through the Nile Valley. And this is the Nile Valley sunbird. It's by no means restricted to the Nile Valley, but that's where it gets its name from. This is a male in breeding plumage with this incredibly beautiful, glossy green upper parts, the dark throat and the sulfur yellow breast and the very long tail feathers. Stunningly beautiful. In winter, he's a little duller, and in winter he goes further north, and I can find him in the Nile Valley in winter, but a special species. This is the Senegal thickney. Many of you will be familiar with the stone curlew, which is the same genus, Phaoronic. And the stone curlew does indeed breed and is found on the north coast in Egypt. But this is an African relative of the stone curlew and is common throughout the Nile Valley and indeed in central Cairo. Now, you saw that photograph of the view from my terrace with just concrete everywhere. The Senegal thickney has adapted itself to an urban lifestyle. And whereas in nature it will nest on sandbanks by the shores of the Nile, it has adopted the flat roofs of buildings in Cairo as its a surrogate sandbank. And so, when I sit here at night, I can hear the call of the Senegal thickney. And in the local club near me, the Zamalek Gazira Club, I can go out there at night and on the golf course there, I can see the Senegal thickney feeding on its insect prey, prodding away at the greens. Senegal cuckoo, a relative of the cuckoos, an African species found throughout sub-Saharan Africa, but through this narrow green vein of life, the Nile, emerges into Egypt and into the delta, and you can hear its sonorous callings at night in the agricultural areas. And here we have the painted snipe, a very secretive bird. It's crepuscular. It's active at dusk and at night, and reverses the normal roles of bird species in that the female, and we have the female here, is more brightly colored than the male. And she also takes the active part in courtship. She woos the males, and it's the males who build the nests, and she mates with the males and lays her eggs in the nests of her various mates. So it's the reversal, it's polyandry, basically. Very secretive, but easily seen if you're very quiet at night along the shores of the River Nile. We have lots of winter visitors here as well, lots of waders and waterfowl coming over, staying at the lakes along the north coast, like Lake Badawiel, Lake Udut, and also along the Nile Valley, and Lake Karun in Fayoum, and Lake Nasser right in the south of the country. And this is one of those waterfowl, the ferruginous duck, which is near threatened. So Egypt is an important wintering place for these ducks. We also have the Red Sea and a number of seabird species which are rare in the Western Palearctic, such as the sooty gull and the brown booby. And this one, the white-eyed gull, which is near endemic to Egypt, but more especially to the Arabian seas. And this is a stunning gull, which is common in the southern shores of Egypt. So anybody who goes to the tourist resorts of Sharm el-Sheikh, or to Hurghada or Guna, and south to Marsa Alam, you stand a good chance of seeing the white-eyed gull. This is that kingfisher again that I showed you earlier, which I see regularly and hear regularly right in central Cairo. This is the fledgling that was photographed by a friend of mine who has a small holding in Fayoum, which is about 2 hours drive southwest of Cairo. And then we have some very, very special birds. And this is Hume's owl, formerly known as Hume's tawny owl. And I have here a very, very old and weather-beaten field guide, the Collins Field Guide, which I think I got in the late 1970s. And this is Hume's owl. And Hume's owl is called here one of the least known owls in the world, very rarely reliably observed in the field. And in this picture, there's not a trace of rufous, and the eyes are black. Hume's owl has now been shown to be slightly more common than thought. And as you can see from this photograph taken by Dina Ali and Rafiq Khalil in Wadi Faran in South Sinai, the eyes are actually piercingly orange. And this owl was called down using its call. And the call is hoo, 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 hoo. So perhaps not it probably still is a very rare bird, but very, very rarely encountered in the wild. And here is the eagle owl, the pharaoh eagle owl that used to be lumped in with the Eurasian eagle owl, Bubo bubo, but is now widely accepted as a separate species, Bubo escalopus. And this used to breed on the step pyramid at Saqqara in Egypt. And I used to do a 4-hour day trip, and I would drive down to the step pyramid and hopefully find the pharaoh eagle owl that breeds on the step pyramid. Then I would drive a little further north to the pyramids of Abu Sia, where the little owl would breed, and I would often find that there. Then I would go up to Zamalek in central Cairo to the Gezira Club, which is a big area of green in the middle of Cairo. And that was a good place for wintering long-eared owls. And I would often be able to find those there. And then, having got those 3 owl species, we would go to the Marriott Hotel, which is one of the big posh hotels in Cairo, and celebrate on their terrace. And hopefully the barn owl would fly over. So we could get the pharaoh eagle owl, the little owl, the long-eared owl, and the barn owl, in theory, on the same day. I only got all 4 on one occasion, but it was a good story. And then in winter, we have loads of wintering waders and waterfowls and more exotic species like this greater flamingo. Again, this was a photograph taken by Tracy Robinson. And the flamingos, they winter here on the lakes along the north coast of Sinai, and also Fayoum, southwest of Cairo, and occasionally on the Red Sea coast. But this is again where I want to start introducing the idea of how the ancient Egyptians portrayed so accurately the birds that they were seeing. And here we have a portrayal of the greater flamingo from the tomb of Merodach in Saqqara, dating back almost 5,000 years. And on these tombs, particularly at Saqqara, with the Old Kingdom, as I say, dating back to almost 5,000 years, the environment was very different there. And there were huge papyrus swamps. And the Egyptians were gradually, over time, they drained those swamps, but those swamps were their hunting ground. And they portrayed these swamps with enormous accuracy. And you can see here the stylized papyrus, these up and down vertical stems. But within those stems are portrayals with great accuracy of the animals and birds that they were encountering. So right in the center of this scene, you have the Egyptian mongoose, Herpestris ichneumon, which to this day is still found in Egypt, and is very much associated with the cobra, but was also worshipped as a minor deity. But you also have here egret species, heron species, pied kingfishers, which we'll be looking at very, very soon. You've got 2 pied kingfishers, the largest bird that is capable of true hovering flight, not the flying into the wind of the kestrel, but true hovering flight. And they are defending their nest from the mongoose. And you can see their nest stylized to the right hand side of the frieze there. We'll be coming back to that because that's not necessarily an accurate portrayal. And there we have the pied kingfisher. And you saw that very urban landscape that I have from my terrace, but I also am just 1 block away from the Nile. And I see these birds virtually every morning when I walk into work, the pied kingfisher. This is a regular breeder, originally from Upper Egypt, but also from the Delta, but has expanded its range in recent years to cover most of the Nile Valley. So the valley between Upper Egypt and the Delta. And the reason that we think that the kingfisher is expanding its range, and this comes from Goodman and Meininger, is that in the late 1960s, 1970s, the Aswan High Dam was constructed. And that blocked off the Nile and controlled the Nile. Previously, the Nile flooded each year, and each year the silt largely from the Ethiopian highlands would flood over Egypt throughout its valley, throughout its delta, and lay this lovely, fertile bed of silt upon the agricultural areas. But it made the water murky. Now, all of that silt is held behind the high dam, and that has poor implications for Egypt, because that silt is no longer distributed over the valley and the delta. Egypt now has to use chemical fertilizer to fertilize the agricultural land. But for the pied kingfisher, it's thought that because that silt was held behind the dam, the water of the Nile is now much clearer, and the pied kingfisher can now fish much more efficiently. So it's expanded its range over the past 30 or 40 years. And as I say, in central Cairo, I now see them regularly. And here it is attacking the mongoose that is threatening its nestlings that you can see in the top right-hand corner. The pied kingfisher, in some representations in ancient Egypt, is portrayed in such detail that the sexual dimorphism, the single band across the breast, the single black band across the white breast of one sex versus the double black band over the white breast of the female. But the chicks are portrayed sitting on top of an umbral of papyrus, and that's not the case. So even though the kingfishers are portrayed in great accuracy, attacking the mongoose, defending their nestlings, the pied kingfisher actually nests in burrows. It doesn't nest in the open. And you've got here also a heron species. Another bird that is very familiar along the Nile is the purple swamp hen. In Egypt, the race we have is greener over its back, but very distinctive. And even in central Cairo, I can find them here. You go on a felucca, which is one of the local sailing boats, and just cruise along the reed beds on the shores of the Nile, and you might see this white bottom disappearing into the reed beds. That is the purple swamp hen. And again, portrayed in incredible accuracy. You can just about make it out at the top the heavy shield and also the heavy legs of the purple swamp hen, much heavier than the familiar moorhen. But also you'll note the representation of the hoopoe, again with its crest raised, but also you can see on the top of the wing the white and black barring, again portrayed in such incredible accuracy by the ancients. And of all the bird portraits, perhaps this is the most famous. These are the Maidum geese. Maidum is a pyramid, the southernmost of the Old Kingdom pyramids, about 40 miles south of Cairo. And in one of the mastabas, a mastaba is a smaller pyramid, a tomb outside the main pyramid. The archaeologists found this astonishing frieze of wild geese. This is from 4,500 years ago, nearly 5,000 years ago. And the colors are so rich because it was sealed up in this mastaba, in this tomb. But you can see just how accurately these birds are portrayed. You've got two white-fronted geese to the left-hand side of the center. Unmistakable. You've got the uniform brown neck and head. You've got the black and gray banding along the belly. You've got the leg color, and you've got that white between the bill and the eye. Then you've got two red-breasted geese, again portrayed with incredible accuracy. One an adult, and yeah, they weren't perfect. There are two white bars there instead of sorry, there are three instead of the two that you would see now. But the other bird has slight white or ash markings to the black belly, which indicates that it's a juvenile. This is an important record because the red-breasted goose is extremely rare in modern Egypt. And yet here, from 4,500, 5,000 years ago, we have them portrayed with such accuracy. The two other geese to the far left, to the far right, these are controversial. Are they grey-lag geese? Are they bean geese? The grey-lag goose now is very common in Egypt as a domestic bird. The bean goose, I think there's one record of it here in Egypt. And the people who analyze these scenes, they're talking about bill color and leg color. But we're talking about a frieze from nearly 5,000 years ago, and the color fades. So who knows? But incredible accuracy. But there are other animals that we find. Here we have the Nile crocodile. The Nile crocodile is extinct as a wild animal in modern Egypt, except south of the high dam in Lake Nasser, where there's a population of several thousands. So you can still see it there. But in ancient Egypt, it was worshipped as the god Sobek, the god of fertility, the god of the Nile. And at the temple of Komombo, which is unique among all of Egypt's temples in that it was dedicated to two gods, not one. It was dedicated to the god Horus, the falcon-headed god, and to the god Sobek, the crocodile. And here we have a photograph from the museum at Komombo of some of the mummified crocodiles. In the Egyptian Museum on Tahrir Square, which has now been transferred out to the Grand Egyptian Museum, which you might have seen the opening of just 2 or 3 weeks ago. There is a whole room dedicated to the animal mummies. So not the mummies of humans, but the mummies of animals. And my good friend and colleague and co-author of my new book, Salima Ikram, she x-rayed a 4-meter crocodile mummy from the Egyptian Museum. And they found within the jaws of that mummy 3 baby crocodiles. And it was thought that the mother crocodile was taking the babies there to the afterlife as food, which was an unpleasant thought. But modern biologists working in the field with living crocodiles have shown that the mother crocodile is actually a very good mother, which is rare in reptiles. And she lays her eggs on a sandbank in a hole, covers them up, and then guards that nest. And she guards it against the Nile monitor, a huge great lizard, and against mongooses and other predators. And then when the young crocodiles hatch, they cheep almost like a bird. And she hears this and uncovers the nest and then carries the young crocodiles down to the river. So extraordinarily rare parental care in a reptile. And we now think, or Dr. Ikram argues, that the crocodile that was mummified in the Egyptian Museum was not taking these baby crocodiles as food to the afterlife. She was taking them into the afterlife for their new life, which is a much more positive experience. Lappet-faced vulture, one of the largest birds of prey with a 3-meter wingspan. Very rare in Egypt, only now found right in the southeast of the country. There is a population in the Negev desert, which may or may not be extant. They're still recorded regularly and are breeding in the southeastmost corner of Egypt. But the importance of this bird is that, and some of you may remember the golden mask of Tutankhamun, where on the top of the mask, there was the uraeus, the symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt. The symbol of Lower Egypt was the cobra, and the symbol of Upper Egypt was the vulture. And it was the lappet-faced vulture. We know that because it's portrayed in such accuracy. It's also portrayed on temple friezes. This is from Dendera Temple, just north of Luxor in Middle Egypt. Another bird of prey which was deified in ancient Egypt was the falcon, the common kestrel. And this is a statue of the falcon god. It was worshipped as Ra, the sun god, but also in its own right. And you can see here in this statue from Edfu Temple in Upper Egypt, the distinctive features of the falcon. And I like the idea that the falcon was worshipped in ancient Egypt. It's still on the tail fin of Egypt Air is the Horus falcon. And Egypt Air's in-flight magazine is still called Horus. And on the campus of my university here in Cairo, we have found 3 nesting sites of the common kestrel. And in recent years, we have filmed kestrels breeding and rearing their young, and they've been enormously successful. It was a student project, and I and Dr. Arthur Boss, as faculty advisors, were a little concerned that our students would be worried that if the smallest hatchlings didn't make it, the students would be upset. But we have had enormous success. Every egg that has hatched, from every egg that's hatched, all of the hatchlings have grown and prospered and fledged. So we haven't had a single infant death, much to our relief as teachers. And then the sacred ibis. This is now extinct in modern Egypt. The last record was in the late 19th century. But it's called the sacred ibis because it was worshipped as the god Thoth in ancient Egypt. Thoth was the god of knowledge, master of the scribes, who presided along with Anubis over the burial of the dead. It's extinct in modern Egypt, but there is talk of it being reintroduced from ibises from Sudan, northern Sudan, which would be closest to, genetically closest to the stock that would have been here in Egypt. But it might recolonize now that Lake Nasser has created new habitat. So it's possible that the sacred ibis could recolonize Egypt. And here in the top right-hand corner, you have a representation of that sacred ibis. The baboon was also worshipped here, and to this day it's called the sacred baboon, the Hamadryas, again associated with the god of knowledge, the god Thoth. And then here is a hieroglyph. And again, it's an ibis, but this one is of the northern bald ibis. Again, last recorded in Egypt in the late 19th century, and now extremely rare throughout its range. It's a population in Morocco, a much smaller population in Turkey, and we don't know the status of the population in Syria before ISIS delivered their stuff. But there are two unconfirmed records from a couple of years ago of the northern bald ibis migrating through Egypt, perhaps to Ethiopian breeding grounds. But you can see the definitive features here: the long down curved bill, the wading legs, etc. But those the shaggy neck. So this is a hieroglyph. Cobra. The Egyptian cobra, of course, popularly associated with the suicide of Cleopatra, where she clutched a cobra to her breast. Whether it was really a cobra or not, who knows? But this was photographed in Fayum by a friend of mine, and appears in temple tombs and friezes. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the uraeus, the symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt. You have the symbol of Upper Egypt, South Egypt. There's the vulture and the cobra. Horn viper, common in the deserts here, and it shimmers down into the sand if it's disturbed. As this is the London Bird Club, a good way to find a horned viper is to listen out for very agitated wheatear species, specifically the hooded wheatear and the white-crowned wheatear. They see the viper and they deliver these alarm calls, and then you can find the viper. The viper will bury itself into the sand, and the horns that it has just behind the eye are thought to protect the eye, so that when it disappears into the sand, the horns keep the sand away from the eye. Of course, snakes don't have eyelids, they're just eyes. So it's almost invisible except for the eyes. And it's the wheat ears and this is the horned viper as a hieroglyph. So I'm nearing the end now. We have more exotic animals on the tombs and temple friezes. This is from a New Kingdom tomb, and it's a giraffe, unmistakable. And I didn't have a picture of a living giraffe because I thought that was all too familiar. But it takes us way back beyond the Phaoronic period to around 10,000 years ago. And around 10,000 years ago, the Western Desert, which is now one of the driest and hottest places on the planet, completely barren. 10,000 years ago, it was a vibrant savanna landscape and ecology. And we know this because the ancients there portrayed the animals on their rock faces and on their tombs and on their caves. And this was made famous some years ago with the movie The English Patient. And The English Patient, which was set in 1920s, early 1930s in Cairo, the hero is flying his mistress over the Western Desert, which was completely unexplored then. And his plane crashed. And he dragged his girlfriend to a cave. And on the walls of the cave were painted the pictures of people swimming. Now, I've been to the cave of the swimmers, and it's not the cave as in the movie. It is a rock face. But because the climate is so hot and dry, the paintings have been preserved 10,000 years later in the same detail. And these are the paintings that appeared in the movie that I sketched when I went and visited the actual cave of the swimmers. But also on these caves were painted the portrayals of the animals that they had there, again, 10,000 years ago. This is a sketch from one of my journals, and I keep extensive journals when I travel. So this is from one of these journals of a giraffe at Jebel near the Gilf Kabir at Wadi Hamra. These are sketches of paintings from Jebel Uwainat, right on the cusp of Egypt, Libya, and Sudan. And again, from 10,000 years ago. And again, with astonishing accuracy. And to end up with the animal that is most often associated with ancient Egypt is the cat, the domestic cat. And the domestic cat was worshipped as the cat goddess Bastet in the Ptolemaic period. And the capital of that was in the modern day city of Zagazig in the Delta, called Tel Busto, where catacombs of literally hundreds of thousands of mummified cats were found. And Egypt is often called where the cat was domesticated. We don't know that. The evidence from that comes from portrayals of cats in a domestic circumstance. So for instance, here on the left-hand side, you can see the leg of the pharaoh. And then you can see on the right-hand side the chair leg, and curled up underneath that is a cat, looking like a domestic tabby. So we can assume that that is a cat that's been domesticated. It's a cat totally at ease in a domestic circumstance. Cat domestication might have been a lot earlier, and there have been findings from Cyprus, for instance, of cats indistinguishable from wild cats in a domestic circumstance, but there have never been any wild cats native to Cyprus. So it could well be that the cat was domesticated far, far earlier. But it goes back in Egypt's history. And this is a modern street cat. And then the hippo. Hippo, very important in ancient Egypt and portrayed in great detail. You can see the teeth and everything. And we chose this, Dr. Salima Ikram and I, we chose this to be on the front cover of our new book because the hippo here is in exactly the same pose as the photograph of the hippo, which is also on the front page of the book, and just portrays how accurately these people from 5,000 years ago were portraying the birds and animals that they lived with. So this is again where I live. Doesn't look like a very promising wildlife scenario, but I will have my Karawan, the Senegal thickney, flying over later. I've had my barn owl nesting. Tomorrow I will have my bulbuls and my house sparrows and my hoopoes. In spring and fall, I'll have European bee-eaters flying over, perhaps the odd blue-cheeked bee-eater flying over. I'll get my kingfishers calling. And then I can just walk 1 block away, so 3 minutes. And this was not so long ago on one of the feluccas, these sailing vessels. This is a juvenile black-crowned night heron. And with that, I will end. But these are my credits. All of the images that are credited come from the 2 books. The new book coming out, hopefully in January, about the animals of ancient Egypt, and then the others.
Oh, that was brilliant. I think everyone really appreciated that talk. I've seen lots of amazing messages in the chat. I apologize, everyone, if we've gone a little bit over, but we have a
Oh, I'm
couple
sorry. You
minutes for
should have
some
warned me.
questions. We have a couple questions, so I've written some down. Janet asked, what is the area of the protected islands compared to London? Run through a few.
What? Sorry?
She's asked, what is the area of the protected islands compared to London?
Minute.
Mm.
These islands are very, very special, which is why they're protected. So it would like be, what can I think of? Like be the Serpentine in Hyde Park.
Mm.
Everything north of there is almost completely a man-made environment in terms of vegetation. And everything south of there has been flooded by Lake Nasser. Now, just because the vegetation is not native Egyptian, the birds and animals have adapted themselves to an artificial environment. So you get all of these herons and egrets and ibises, etc. They're still there. It's just that the native vegetation is no longer really native.
Someone else asked a very good question. Do peregrines breed in Cairo itself?
No. Um, the peregrine is um, a winter visitor here, and I've seen them in Alexandria and in Cairo. In fact, I on my old campus, right in the center of Cairo in Tahrir Square, I witnessed a peregrine stoop on a palm dove, which was quite dramatic. And I almost got arrested because I was watching peregrines um, in winter. A pair had were hunting pigeons from the top of the television building here in Cairo, and the television building is high security area, and I had binoculars and I was looking at the television building, and that didn't go down well with the security forces. So they're here in winter.
Wow. Maria's asked, are the golf courses quite an important habitat in Cairo? As you mentioned, the Senegal thick knee feed there.
Yes, the you know, unlike London, which I think most of your audience will be aware of, there are huge areas of green in London. There are very, very few areas of green in Cairo. Um, and so they are meccas for um, bird life. And so the Senegal thickney, for instance, I can see regularly at the Gezira Golf Club, um, just across the river from where I am. And also that's great for um, introduced species like the Indian silverbill and the rose-ringed parakeet, and uniquely in Egypt, and indeed uniquely in Cairo, the Alexandrine parakeet breeds there as well. But these areas of green are so precious in the city. Um, the golf courses are growing along the Red Sea coast because Western tourists are coming over and they want their sun and sea and everything, but they also want their golf. Um, so, despite Egypt's um, shortage of water, these golf courses are growing up. But these gardens and golf courses are providing habitat for birds that are coming from north from Sudan. So the black bushchat is now being recorded very regularly um, on these green areas in the very southeast of Egypt because the hotel greenery is creating this habitat. The red
Wow,
fox is also doing very well through that as well.
we'll leave it one more question. But perhaps afterwards, Richard, you could suggest to everyone how best to get in contact with you if they had any more questions. But firstly, Mario's asked, did the mummifications of animals reduce the number of species of individuals? And what about the Romans taking beasts for the circus?
Um, as regards taking beasts for the circus, I don't know of any direct reference to that. Um, but for the mummification, that's an excellent question because the ancient Egyptians mummified things in industrial quantities. And I referred to the cat and Zagazig and Tel Busta, where the cat was worshipped as the goddess Bastet. In the early 20th century, it was excavated and they found hundreds of thousands of mummified cats. And these were British archaeologists, and there were so many of them that they were ground up and used as fertilizer, sent back to the UK and used as fertilizer. There are still 67 mummified cats from Tel Busta in the British Museum. Elsewhere, I worked on a dig in Saqqara for 2 seasons where we were looking at um, the Hawk galleries. And there were, again, hundreds of thousands, the catacombs going under the desert and side rooms coming off these catacombs, and all of them lined with these clay pots which had supposedly mummified falcons or ibises in them. And this was before where it was much easier and cheaper to X-ray these mummies. Um, a very small sample of these hundreds of thousands were taken, and we opened up the mummies, and some of them there was nothing in there. And when the mummy was wrapped beautifully in bandages with the head of the falcon painted beautifully on that mummy, there was nothing in there. So it's possible that what might have happened, and you would have to talk to Dr. Salima Ikram on this. She's the Egyptologist, but we worked on that dig together. That your ancient Egyptian would go to the temple and say, I want to venerate the god Horus or the god Thoth or whatever, to ensure my place in the afterlife. And the priests would say, okay, fine, we'll do that for you. He'd pay his money, and then they would wrap the mummy, but wrap the mummy with nothing inside it. Now, that might have happened, but on the other hand, in Fayum, southwest of Cairo, there is an ancient site called Crocodipolis, which was a center for the worship of the god Sobek and the god of fertility and the Nile. And there, the archaeologists have excavated a series of pits and ponds where the crocodile eggs were hatched and then reared and then fattened up, etc., and then as adults. So we really can't think that when the mummies were done in these industrial quantities, it could possibly have been from wild caught species. It must have been a combination of perhaps a priestly scam and captive breeding, amongst other things. But also some quite moving things. So, for instance, they found mummies of hawks, and I use hawk in the sort of historical sense, falcons, with a mummified shrew with the mummified hawk as food for the afterlife. So it's very complex, and what an excellent question.
Incredible. And Richard, if people had questions later on, is there a suitable way to circulate your contact address, or we're happy to follow up after the event as
No,
well
just
to pass along your details?
they can email me. That's fine.
We can circulate.
Yeah.
Unless Maria Gahan, you think there's anything else left to cover?
No, that sounds fine. It's really been fascinating talk. Thank you so much. Really
No,
enjoyed it.
my pleasure. I do hope people enjoy it. And
It's really
Egypt
good.
is such a wonderful place to come. And my new book, I hate to hark on about it, but people come to Egypt and they want to see the monuments. Karnak and Luxor and the pyramids, etc. But with this new book, what they can do is on the right-hand side of the page is Dr. Salima Ikram's narrative of the importance of the animal in ancient Egypt. And on the left-hand side is my narrative of the living animal with a photograph. So an increasingly environmentally aware audience of the living animal can identify from the historical tombs and friezes and everything. I'm very excited by